This video is sponsored by Artistree. Hi everyone, this is Fionapollo and I do art commentary. And for today, let's talk about plagiarism and copyright versus inspiration in the art world. Oh dearie me, this really is a topic as old as time when it comes to us artists, isn't it? I swear down that it pops up every couple of months, and I wouldn't be surprised if some of you are sick of it. Inspiration, referencing, tracing, plagiarism, copyright, and art theft are all things that sometimes feel as if they can infer the exact same thing, even when they don't. No one likes to believe that someone is using their own hard work and claiming it as their own, but in artistic circles, this can be relatively common, but not always in the way that we think. The reason I wanted to look into this is because, funnily enough, I've been thinking about doing retrospective videos, one of which was going to be on Bee and Puppycat, only to find that supposedly a person who has signed a contract with the brand for them to use this person's artwork has had all of this artist's Bee and Puppycat related listings forcibly removed from their Etsy store. The Bee and Puppycat team didn't purchase the rights to these works, by the way, only to use the person's artwork. So this was an extremely dubious decision. Thankfully, the artist affected has said that they've spoken with the team and things are being resolved. But yeah, this just got me thinking about the big picture of this stuff and what it encompasses. Is fan art plagiarism? And if that's the case, then what else can be considered that? And how do we know we're not constantly crossing a line somewhere? This has long been a point of contention for artists in a world that, especially in recent times, doesn't seem to value what we make for longer than 5 seconds, and which also seeks to monopolize as many aspects of the creative industry as possible, even to its own detriment. This can unfortunately lead to a heightened sense of protectiveness towards our own intellectual property. Throw in a couple of other factors like popularity, competitiveness, AI, and livelihoods into the mix, and you have a lot of paranoid people looking to protect their works, but who also understandably end up jumping at the sight of any kind of line towing. And it becomes even trickier to know where the lines are when different kinds of artists are all hanging out within the same spaces. We have long-time professionals showcasing their works alongside school kids drawing fan art for fun, and the difference in things like lived experiences, generational customs, commercialization, and all of that can also have a hand in how people react to certain situations pertaining to something like plagiarism when it comes about. So in this video, I wanted to look into a bit of background surrounding the laws around copyright and plagiarism. I wanted to learn about this a bit more, and how this differs between companies and individuals, the nature of how stuff like fan art and online challenges play into it, and also chat about the culture surrounding these issues and how we can possibly maneuver around them. If you like what you're hearing, then pretty please consider liking and subscribing. I talk a lot about art topics, animation, and the psychology around popular culture. Please note that a lot of what I say in my videos is purely speculative and not based in fact, unless evidence is given to state otherwise. I'm not an expert, I don't always know the right terminology of things, and this is why feedback from you guys in the comments is so important and so very appreciated. Alright, let's roll! But first, a word from our sponsor. Now, I don't know about you, but I both love and loathe the idea of doing commissions. On the one hand, it's rewarding when someone loves what you've made for them, and it's always nice to draw someone else's characters for a change, and being paid to do it feels pretty great too. On the other hand, you have to deal with hostile social media algorithms, scammers, requests coming in from all angles, demands to know where things are up to, unreliable payment apps like PayPal, and the list just goes on and on. It doesn't stop. So that's why I am thrilled to introduce you all to the commission-friendly platform Artistree. Artistree is a commission site with both the customer and artist in mind, and is unlike any other platform used for this kind of work that I have seen. For one thing, the artist keeps 100% of their intended fee. If you charge £100 or dollars, you get exactly that. Artistree only charges a small service fee to the customer, which helps to keep the site running. The site also does its best to help defend artists from chargebacks via proof of work submissions through the platform itself. Also, as someone who is near constantly run ragged, I'm very impressed with Artistree's intuitive dashboard where it can automatically organise your commissions and create a public queue showcasing the status of all ongoing jobs so that your customers can quickly see where you're up to with their piece. And if all that isn't enough, Artistree is also dedicated to the environment and is an official partner of the Eden Restoration. With every sale made on their website, they plant a tree, and have managed to plant 15,000 of them already. If you're interested and want to check it out, sign-ups are completely free for artists and no sign-up is required for customers. And as an added little tidbit, I will personally be offering 3 full-body character commission slots on Artistree if anyone is interested. So please check out Artistree today, preferably after watching my video though. Part 1. The Laws of the Land. In order to talk about plagiarism, we need to lay the groundwork for what constitutes as such. Unfortunately, while there are a good number of commonalities among various nations, this is something that will obviously differ ever so slightly from country to country, meaning that in the online world, the goalpost will always be slightly shifting depending on things such as the artist's country of origin, where they're currently living, or what country of enforcement a social media hosting site belongs to. Not that that seems to matter much anymore. Also, I do just want to point out that while we will be using the word plagiarism a lot, I'm going to try and differentiate types of plagiarism that aren't inherently malicious as benign plagiarism. This will include things like art studies, referencing, and so on. The word plagiarism is not being used to infer strictly malicious intent throughout this discussion, so please keep that in mind. The most important thing to note with plagiarism is that the law only really considers it illegal if it infringes on any existing copyright. For example, trying to sell your own Spider-Man print and passing it off as an official product will land you in some serious hot water, but even this has its own loopholes and limitations which we'll get to later on. OCs, or characters who do not have that same level of copyright attached to them, while they are still subject to protections such as the creator's intellectual property, aren't quite in the same league as long-standing, recognisable brands. The Merriam-Webster Online Dictionary defines plagiarism as to steal and pass off the ideas or words of another as one's own, to use another's production without crediting the source, to commit literary theft, to present as new and original an idea or product derived from an existing source. So that seems pretty straightforward, right? Don't try to pass off something that already exists as your own work. Except real life is never quite that simple, and there might be a few exceptions to that. Sure, it seems simple enough to understand, but how far exactly can we go with that? With that in mind, there are a couple of different types of plagiarism which I wanted to go through and try to relate to an example within creative circles. The first is verbatim plagiarism. This is classified as word-for-word copying from another source without placing the copied text in quotation marks and providing a clear citation, for example, an acknowledgement of where the materials came from. So this example is widely recognised in art spaces as good old-fashioned tracing. Nothing about it is original, it's very clearly copied line for line with no acknowledgement or regard for the original creator, and is often the type of thing which first comes to mind when the word plagiarism is mentioned. And it's no wonder. It's all around just not a very inspired way to make an art piece that you're planning to showcase and potentially sell if you're going down that route. But we do need to remember that while there are some faux pas, everything can have a function to some extent. In terms of benign plagiarism, things like life studies such as copying a specific piece in order to break it down and understand the artistic methods used so that they can be utilised in a more original piece later on can fall under this category. Another category is mosaic plagiarism. This involves copying parts of another's material but changing a few words here and there without placing the material in quotes or providing a citation. This one is basically the copy my homework but change some of the words around category, and it's also where things can get a bit confusing between where people feel a line can be drawn between plagiarism and heavy reference. The big thing with most of these categories as well, but with especially this one, is the intent of the artwork created. For example, a Draw This in Your Style challenge is technically an exercise in heavy referencing, but other artists are being invited to do so by the original artist, which kind of nullifies any valid conviction of bad faith intent. The point at which people tend to be touchy on this one is when that invitation hadn't been extended and a random individual was just like, oh yeah, I redrew this piece in my own style because I wanted to. Art fixing can also technically fall into this category as well, which is its own kettle of fish entirely. Art fixing mostly has a lot of negative connotations and is typically done with the attitude that the original piece and artist are wrong for doing things a certain way. And sometimes what can also happen is you have people who are helping out a beginner artist by recreating their piece and pointing out areas of improvement. It's all about context. Another type can include providing inaccurate information about the sources in citations and using too many sources without enough interconnecting original material, with the result that the paper contains almost no original work. Now, this one I feel lines up perfectly with the concerns we've seen around the rise of AI-generated images. And one thing I'm very happy to report, even if it doesn't solve all of the problems people have with it, is that AI-generated images cannot be copyrighted, and as such, the original human artists will be protected should someone try to insist that they instead tried to copy the AI images. And one last type of plagiarism we'll go into is self-plagiarism. This is a practice mainly found among academics where the author recycles their own works, dressing up old research to make it appear original and new, and is generally a deliberate act. In the art world, it's a bit hard to find a way in which this one would apply. The only instance I can think of is if you are under contract to draw something and decide to recreate it outside of the contract, I guess. If anyone knows how this can be applied, then go ahead and sound off in the comments, because I'm not actually too sure. But basically, these are all types of plagiarisms that are outlined in plagiarismchecker.net. So if you want to read up on this a bit more, there's your ticket. It does relate more to academic papers and things like that, but it can also be applied to different things as well, so don't just think it only applies to papers. Now, clearly a lot of the examples given were more so focused on non-commercial uses by individuals, but even with that, people can still face repercussions for how they create something through plagiarism. Probably the biggest factor with this comes in the form of whether the original source is trademarked. So if you're an artist who is sick to death of people profiting from your work's likeness and you have the means to do so, this is technically an option, but even trademarking in copyright isn't foolproof. People can fight against infringement by trademarking their works, but if someone else trademarks something first, then unless they agree to sign that trademark over to you in a written agreement, you've lost out. If you sign a contract with a company which states that they own anything you create, such as Disney with their animators, you have pretty much forfeited those ideas and cannot lay claim to them against the contract holder. This is also true for any contract you sign relating to your work, including things such as competitions, so remember to always read things before you sign them. You also can't really trademark certain poses, non-tangible ideas, and so on. The idea needs to have been physically documented and trademarked and not too easily replicated before it can be seen by law as having been plagiarized. For example, Usain Bolt can't trademark his classic lightning pose and use that to sue every person on the planet who does so in photos, but also, while Disney can't strike down certain stories that fall within public domain, what they can strike you down for is if your character designs are too similar to a Disney trademarked character. Winnie the Pooh, for example, is in fact within the public domain as a story, but you can't have a story of him as a yellow bear with a red shirt, because that's Disney's Winnie the Pooh. So with all of these examples, how precisely are we able to gauge when a particular type of benign plagiarism is permissible? The first and easiest answer is probably consent. If you have permission to do so, or if you provide relevant credentials to the original, 90% of the time there shouldn't be any issue, at least not when concerning individuals, as long as there is a mutual understanding. But then, while that may work out on an individual scale, what about when there isn't really an easy way to get consent? A big company or a popular artist isn't exactly going to be able to give explicit permission to each and every individual who wants to draw something for them. So this is when blanket permissions and exceptions come into the mix, some of which are also upheld by law through contractual means, just like we stated before. Naturally, there will always be exceptions to the rule. Most individuals and companies are, for the most part, completely fine with people creating works based on their existing properties if it comes from a place of admiration, such as fan art or plucking specific concepts from something and putting an individual spin on it. One example of this being in fanfiction with alternate universe story scenarios, and for the most part this is generally accepted, though sometimes people can revoke their previous acceptance of such material if they deem it to have gone too far. In general, there's just a lot of red tape around this, and it's a really big contributor in how attitudes around the different forms of reference, copyright, and plagiarism take form, especially online. Part 2. Blurring the lines. So just as a recap, when is infringement lawfully considered okay? Most notably, it tends to be okay when it involves non-commercial use. Just posting online or showcasing it in a public space with no monetary gain is not going to get you thrown in the doghouse. But there will still be factors to consider, such as the court of public opinion. It's technically not illegal, but if you happen to have traced another person's artwork and posted it without due credit to the original, that's still pretty frowned upon in many online circles, especially with artists who can be quite protective of their own works, and the fans of said works who will immediately flag it as plagiarism. Now, when this begins to involve commercialized products and trademarked IPs is when things get a bit more dicey legally speaking. And this is also where the incident with Bee and Puppycat comes into play. Anyone who has been to a convention will know that fan art is often the most sought after type of art that can be found in these spaces. But the thing is, selling fan art is technically a breach of copyright law and can get you in legal trouble to the point where some convention organizers will shut down your booth if you have too much of it. The main reason that most fan artists aren't really persecuted is because it would actually cost more money for companies to go after these individuals than what they would get out of it. And many are almost smart enough, to realize that fan art is just free advertising for the most part. But that still doesn't stop some convention circuits from not allowing over a certain percentage of fan art per vendor just to avoid the con itself from being sued rather than the individual. This is likely the same thought process surrounding the Bee and Puppycat Etsy store situation, albeit this is an online store instead of physical. But what can also have an effect on this is the fact that some trademark properties were only able to get to the level they are now thanks to fan contributions. And B&P is a really good example of this. The series started out as a pilot episode on YouTube posted by Channel Frederator. After gaining a significant amount of intrigue thanks to its calming lo-fi vibes and similar art direction to other popular shows of the time, including Steven Universe and Adventure Time, it eventually came out with 10 episodes funded via Kickstarter, also posted on Frederator. After that, we didn't hear about the show for quite some time because they didn't have the money to advertise, but it was essentially viewed as a cult classic until eventually Bee and Puppycat Cat Lizzie in Space was released on Netflix to mixed reviews. The single biggest reason that the show was able to get so far, even though sometimes fans went years without hearing anything about how production was going or what the plans were for the series and having no advertising, is because it struck a chord with fans and they kept the intrigue alive. So it's more so a balancing act of both respecting that there are laws surrounding a particular copyrighted source material, versus acknowledging that the source material would not be in such high demand if not for the people who dedicated their time, money, and resources to show their appreciation for it and help it along. But as far as online spaces are concerned, typically a lot of the accusations online regarding plagiarism come from niche communities where it's almost impossible not to take inspiration from one another. Even BMP was accused of having copied Steven Universe at one point. It's kind of hard to claim someone is infringing on your own works unless the piece is a fully traced cutout of the original, and despite these similarities, the two shows are completely different, and the excess of creative works are also not exempt. Because a lot of artists online won't just have any old illustration trademarked because trademarking costs money, and also because there is a culture of sharing techniques, styles, and skills in artistic communities, it can be difficult to enforce certain boundaries regarding your work. But that's not to say that it's always seen as a bad thing when someone takes certain aspects of your work. Something to also consider is that the reason something may be subject to benign plagiarism in the first place is because it becomes trendy, and eventually others want to test it out and get a piece of the action, or they just like it enough to want to incorporate aspects of it into their own works as a kind of homage. People might not be doing similar work to you because they want to steal your ideas, but because they genuinely love it and want to incorporate parts of it into their own identity. In short, they're inspired. The famous Akira slide animation is a great example of this, as many people both found the shot itself to be iconic, and the use of the slide eventually became a cool way to show appreciation for the anime itself, while also contributing to a neat little inside joke / meme within the animation industry. It became this really nice example of cultural sharing as well, since Western animation also parodies this shot. If we want to hit closer to home with this, take the art CC for example. My video structure, especially with transitions and chapters, is primarily inspired by Thuman, but that doesn't especially mean I'm trying to copy Thuman or that she's going to strike me down with copyright, because the idea to use transitions and a specific video structure can't really be copyrighted. And the reason we all tend to grow together within a specific niche is because viewers enjoy how a certain thing is done and like to see the different ways that other individuals within that same niche go about it. Just like a trend, if enough people do something, naturally, people just become interested in it. If I was to make a carbon copy of one of her artworks and either use it in a monetized video or sell it as prints though, that would indeed be copyright infringement. And I did kind of consider asking the art girls for a joke if I could redraw one of their pieces for this video as like an added twist of irony, but I forgot. Some of that distinction probably has something to do with how video making in itself is viewed more like a business model as opposed to a deeply personal sense of self-expression. The tried and true method of video creation in the commentary community at large is not one that is especially gate-kept. But there will always be those within the audience who will point out similarities and enact a sense of suspicion around them, though thankfully the majority seem to understand that similarities across channels is just a thing that happens.
Hey there everyone, I'm Lin, and it looks like Apollo has asked me to come and give you a brief talking to about how commentary channels can often borrow from one another in terms of video formatting without being guilty of plagiarism. Now, there are many different foils of commentary in terms of our visual presentation, but to keep things simple, we will first look towards the cloth I happen to be cut from, in the form of what is most frequently referred to as gameplay commentary. It's a pretty common style in the commentary sphere as a whole. Just pop open OBS, stick it on in the background, and enjoy playing whatever game you were gonna play today anyway. This will then leave you with a video file that you can then use to hold audience retention on the screen. That is of course for those of you who aren't just listening to commentators while drawing or something. Now, is this formatting plagiarizing anyone? Not really, no. And the reason for this is because your visual style of commentary is just the beginning. You need to look past it at the actual substance of the content in question. I recall Doodletones making a pretty similar point to this in a video in the past, so I'll try to articulate it in a more elaborated way with a couple of examples here. One of the more prominent gameplay commentators in the corner of the community that I inhabit, at least, would be Harley TBS. So you may wonder what separates Harley's content from the content made by Leafy, for example, the man who is most commonly recognized as the one who popularized the format. Well, that would be because even with the similar visual style, a video from Harley and a video from Leafy seek to accomplish completely different things here. For Harley, it's most frequently giving their opinion on a given topic, and for Leafy, it's to point towards someone to make distasteful jokes at their expense most of the way, without really arguing much other than that somebody is cringe. On top of that, we can take it one step further, and ask how Harley sets themselves themselves apart from someone like Definitely Bored Oranges, for example, as that can lie in the way that they deliver what they have to say. Harley delivers things in a more analytical tone, whereas Oranges will spice things up with a lot more visual gags and memes, typically in a way that reflects the tone of what he's saying. And from there, you can extend even further into questions like what topics are discussed, or what views on a given topic are given. The point is that even with the common title of Leafy Clone being used to describe gameplay commentary, we will largely set ourselves apart in other significant ways that make the viewing experience of a gameplay commentator considerably different to that of another. And by and large, you can extend this even further into places like the art commentary community, as some may focus on art-related issues, like Thuman for example, and some may simply use art as B-roll footage while talking about more general subjects like Hopeless Peaches for example. Even with the similarities in visual style of a video, the fact that the majority of the actual substance in commentary that people are watching it for, being the commentary itself and how it's delivered, is diverse enough from channel to channel that it's not like anyone's brand is being infringed upon here. And to say that commentators using a similar format to one another equates to plagiarism is a bit of a stretch, when it still leaves the main draw of this content up for contention, and that most frequently ends up being different enough that it isn't crossing the border between plagiarism and inspiration all too much here. And as far as I'm concerned, it's pretty bad faith to argue otherwise, when you need to either ignore the main draw of this genre, or to act like something as vague as a given type of visual presentation is something that any one person can really stake a claim to in order to have it stolen. And with that said, it looks like I'm out of time. Back over to you, Apollo.
In online creative spaces where the stakes are relatively low and people are more open to collaboration and taking ideas, this becomes a pretty regular occurrence, and typically when suspicion of plagiarism comes about, it's when an overtly egregious case is put to the forefront and has people thinking twice about the intentions of everyone around them. There's really something to be said about how social media especially plays into that sense of unrest and can snap someone into a state of panic in the blink of an eye, and I don't really have a concrete solution to it. And it definitely doesn't seem like anything plays on this anxiety more than AI at the moment, considering it feels like the bulk of it is being made for no other reason than to run human artists out of town. If you want to defend your artworks from AI, then please, I beg of you, put your artwork through Glaze. Glaze is basically an image cloaking engine that scrambles the AI's perception of the cloaked artwork and makes it impossible to steal. If you want more info, I'll leave a link below, but yeah, I know that people want me to talk more in depth about AI, but in all honesty, I don't really want to talk in depth about AI because I just really don't want to give it a platform. I'd rather focus on human artists and leave it at that. But yeah, moving on, let's wrap things up. Part 3. Draw the line. Even though some laws surrounding trademark and copyright are supposedly in place to help us, they still aren't perfect and are very much geared in favour of larger corporate entities as opposed to individuals, so it's important to take a lot of these laws with a pinch of salt with that in mind, and to just try to get a feel for the general attitude surrounding certain practices among fellow artists and communities. There are a number of valid reasons why certain types of benign plagiarism are enacted, and it's important to not immediately go on the defensive when faced with something that looks eerily similar to something you'd seen before. Is it a life study? Did the person tag the original creator? Is it a part of an art challenge? Is the original piece a part of a person's income? There are a lot of things to consider, but even with that, you are within your right as an artist to inquire what the intent is with the piece, and if it truly crosses the threshold of making you uncomfortable, talk it out. And if that doesn't work, make your stance clear on it for others so that the incident can be minimised in future. But with that in mind, even if something bears similarity, there is only so far you can go with that kind of enforcement. If 70% or more of the piece looks like it was taken from your concepts, then sure, raise suspicion, but a similar style, pose, or premise on their own should not be assumed to be plagiarism right off the bat. It could just be inspiration or influence. Despite popular opinion, fellow artists are your best allies for stuff like this. We should ideally be trying to help each other protect ourselves and our works, in addition to offering advice regarding the finished products. Again, if you're not sure, just ask. Even if they don't fully confirm or deny, you can usually gauge a person's intent with the piece by the way that they talk to you, and your fans or online friends will likely support you or be able to give their own thoughts on whether the piece crosses a line. Anyway, that's it from me. Thank you so much for watching, and if you liked what I had to say, please leave a like and subscribe. I know this one might seem a bit conflated, but I have seen this happen from time to time, which is why I wanted to do a surface dive into it. A big thank you to Artistree for sponsoring this video, and thank you to Lin for agreeing to give her own thoughts on the subject. Stay safe everyone, and I will speak to you soon. Bye!